Dear colleagues, it's such sheer happiness and delight to see so many friends of the number one business school in Ukraine, the MBA provider, and we to continue our forum. We had a great socializing occasion and opportunity during the coffee break and our interval for strategic planning and how to retain people, how to engage the best talents in business. And now we are going to discuss. I haven't heard any such discussion during my coffee break. It is a sophisticated issue, but if we look at the agenda of the International Business Fora, almost at all such fora, we have this as a central or centerpiece issue. And now with the experts, we're going to discuss business resilience, business responsibility, and we have correlation of the two very important topics, also profitability and how to combine sustainability with profitability, and how to look into the best practices and first steps to do that. I would like to now to introduce our experts. The first guest and expert is Mr. John Morrison.
Institute for Human Rights and Business, he is ranked as one of the top 25 influencers in the fight against modern slavery. John Morrison has advised a number of businesses, governments and UN agencies, and currently sits on advisory councils for 2 UK ministers as well as the EBRD, and co-chaired the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council on Human Rights.
Mr. John Morrison, hello, thank you for being with us.
Hello there.
And the second expert, Mr. Christian Sarkar.
Christian Sarkar, entrepreneur, consultant, activist, publisher, and artist. Christian Sarkar gained recognition on the Thinkers 50 radar for his involvement in brand activism. He, along with Philip Kotler, co-founded the Marketing Journal, an online platform.
Hello, Christian. Thank you for being with us. Welcome to our forum.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. Morrison, I have the first question to you about the responsible business, and the general question: how do you define what the responsible business is, and how do you see the opportunities of for Ukrainian companies to implement responsible business in current challenges, in the challenges of war in Ukraine?
Well, thank you very much, Vadim, and greetings to everybody in Kyiv. I think 30 years ago, it would have been very hard to answer your question. And to be honest, 30 years ago, I would have said, I was much younger, that there really wasn't any clarity about what responsible business meant. But since the year 2000, when Kofi Annan was the UN Secretary General and developed the principles of the UN Global Compact, and then in 2011, the Human Rights Council unanimously endorsed the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, and that has shaped the way that the OECD has framed its responsibilities, and now also the European Union and a number of nation states within Europe. So it ranges, of course, from ESG, environmental issues, social issues, governance and anti-corruption, but it's fundamentally based on a do no harm standard of due diligence, know what your impacts are as a business, take action to mitigate and prevent bad things and maximize the good things, be transparent about what you're doing, and allow effective remedy for workers and communities if you make mistakes. That is the essence of where we are. And this is becoming less of a voluntary issue and more of a mandatory requirement, as we'll talk about in a few minutes, I think.
Okay, John, what do you think, what advantages can Ukrainian businesses gain by investing in responsible practices compared with business focusing on profit maximization? So such practical question, but it's very important for business. Yeah.
It is, and I've run businesses myself, and I sit on the board committees for a couple of companies. Look, you can make money by not being responsible. That's your choice. But you can also, I would say, increasingly make money from being responsible. And I think the question really is, do you do the minimum, or do you really lean in to the responsibility opportunities? And if we take the example of Ukraine, I believe only 3% of your energy at the moment is from renewable sources, 3% from hydro, 23% from nuclear. There is a huge opportunity to develop your renewables capacity, localize energy. I would argue that is strategically good for the country and not just good for the environment. And there will be lots of money, I think, from the European Investment Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the International Finance Corporation, and others. People talk about a new Marshall Plan. As this money comes forward, it will be conditioned on the due diligence that I've mentioned earlier. If you want to engage in those opportunities around energy production, energy storage, reconstructing the built environment, and you want to access international finance, you can choose whether it's just a compliance issue for you or whether it's really a competitive advantage, and that you might win more money, more contracts by really being good at your environmental and social performance. So I really think the choice is in front of business. Ukraine will also have huge export opportunities around raw materials. Import opportunities, we're already seeing European export credit agencies looking at Ukraine for exporting into Ukraine. Again, the same standards will apply. And if you're looking for money on energy transition, look at what is happening already in countries like South Africa, Indonesia, Vietnam, Colombia, etc., where large amounts of international finance is being mobilized for energy transition, but environmental social conditions are built into that. As is the case in the USA with the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. So again, I would summarize by saying you can make money by not being responsible. Clearly, many businesses do in every country. But I would say in the medium to long term, particularly in the sectors I've mentioned, but then eventually I would say most business sectors, your advantage will become by being responsible. The question for you today is whether you want to be in a leadership position or in a compliance position. Yeah.
Thank you, John. Christian, maybe can you add something?
To think to this, I mean, I think he's right with alliance's leadership, and I think Ukraine has an opportunity to do something different and really switch to building a more regenerative economy, a more regenerative, let's say, business climate that's not just focused on competitive advantage, but even on collaborative advantage. What I mean by that, actually, businesses are going to learn to much more integrated sort of with the communities that they're in. And this, for example, I'm in Palermo right now because I came here on a project to basically see what we could do in the absence of big funding from outside, to see we build more regenerative businesses, more regenerative economic situation when there isn't tons of funding coming from outside. We found is businesses can actually work to do a lot of things, but you have to build this trust. And in a sense, your company has never been as united as it is today, I believe. And so you have to take that unification brought you guys together, this threat, to really turn that into a new way of working, which is based on the common good and sort of based on companies working together to do things. I can go into some examples a little later if you would like, but I think it's very important that regeneration isn't just about climate or greening. It's really about community wealth building and creating communities that are being regenerated. And all of this happens through the regeneration of the common good.
We have a question about competitive advantages. Can responsible business have competitive advantages in the Ukrainian market, and what strategies can help companies effectively combine responsibility and profits? The same question about these two categories. John?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah. Okay. I would say there are quite a few academic organizations that have tried to demonstrate the relationship between profit making and responsibility. And all of the studies I've read, they show strong causation. Strong correlation, not causation, correlation. We're still beginning to see some evidence now of causation. So what do I mean? I mean that companies that are good at being responsible tend to be the companies that are better managed, that are more efficient, more competitive, and well positioned in the marketplace. Companies that are irresponsible tend to be the companies that are less likely to meet those criteria. What I think we will see in the next 5 years is clear evidence of causation, that by being responsible, you win new opportunities. And I think you'll begin to see that through public procurement to start with, inward investment, in some sectors, even with consumers. I've worked for a number of companies where we had evidence that clearly our customers expected this and trusted us for this. And our workers expected it as well. So I think as time goes by, we will see more evidence of causation, but there's already a lot of evidence for correlation. And I imagine the same will be true for Ukraine. You have big opportunities, of course, I hope, in the months and years to come. You have to be honest and open about the challenges such as corruption, and the real needs, the amount of money needed. I think the World Bank has estimated that we're talking about 400 billion, I think it is, if I've got the figure right here, of investment required. Most of that will be in loans and grants, but most of it will be conditioned around the things I'm talking about. So I think Ukraine will be part of a journey where we will see greater and greater evidence for strong business performance and profit making in related to what the European Union now calls double materiality. Your financial performance, but also your performance in terms of society, social and environmental. A lot of companies now around Europe will publish ESG reports and financial reports. What I think we'll see is those two things come together, and a very strong evidence base that performing well on environmental and social issues has financial return. But I think it will happen more in some sectors quicker than others. And I do think energy, all forms of energy, perhaps transport as well, and infrastructure are the sectors that you will see it in first, in Ukraine as well. Yeah.
Thank you, John. Christian, what do you think about?
Yeah, I think the difference that I think we are going to see more and more of is the shift from being an extractive business to becoming a regenerative business that actually leaves the community that it's working in better shape. So one of the things that Ukraine should look at, and of course this is very regional, but you should look at building community brands. And these are brands that are not global brands, but are very strong regionally, very strong in the place where they live. When you do that kind of thing, you build connections to the community that make you much more resilient and much more stable in the long run. So I'll give you an example. You know, in Italy, here where I'm at right now with this project, Birra Messina is a famous beer from Sicily that was actually acquired by Heineken. Heineken did a few changes, moved the operations out of Sicily, and the company sort of went, just wasn't profitable. As a local company, and again expanded, and this time Heineken were to products. You can use our, so in a sense, this was a win-win for both the larger company and this local brand, which was in a regional way. Kind of, you know, it's like the Mittelstand in Germany, where you have 500, 800 companies that are small to, let's say, medium-sized companies that are very strong, technically advanced, but not, and world-class companies, but they're not trying to dominate the entire world and acquire and grow. They're actually stable growth companies. So an economy that's full of mid-sized companies that are local and yet are cosmo-local, that means they also export their stuff all over the world, but are not based on this global mindset of extraction, but rather of regeneration, is, I think, the model that Ukraine needs to look at very carefully. And most business schools don't teach that. You know, they teach us how to maximize value creation for the business, but nowhere do they teach us how to maximize value creation for the community.
I'd agree with Christian there. And I say there's a danger when there's a lot of money on the table for reconstruction, that it's just the big companies that take the money because of their absorption capacity, whether those be large Ukrainian or state-owned companies or Western multinationals. It would be really bad for Ukraine if that's where most of the money went. I think your economy and your society would benefit from diversity in all forms. Localization, regenerative economies, circular economies. As Christian has said, there's some very good thinking happening at the local level across Europe and across the world. And make sure that whatever Marshall Plan or Ukraine facility is created, it doesn't just create opportunities for the big guys. Let's make sure that the conditions are in there to create a diverse local economy. I think that's the danger, right, in the next few years.
Christian, in many of your works, the focus is on regenerative economy. Could you please explain this definition? What is the distinctive feature of regeneration economy?
Sure. I mean, we start by saying, you know, in the traditional definition of regeneration, and, you know, every sort of, there's regenerative agriculture, there's regenerative healthcare. All of them have to do with renewing sort of the ground you're in. So the way we translated that to business, that's Phil Kotler and myself and Enrico Foglia in the book, we basically said that, you know, a regenerative business is a business that enriches the community that it's in. Instead of extracting the value out of it, it actually improves the condition of the ground. And of course, the other definition is that regeneration must regenerate the common good. And we define 9 dimensions of the common good with nature as one of the central features. Now, of course, there's a marketing problem. The marketing problem is, why should I change? I'm happy doing things the way I've always done. And why should companies be motivated to change? And in our book, again, we explain that, the corporation is sort of obsolete. It's not fit for purpose for what's coming. And I think Ukraine has a chance to really leapfrog the traditional development cycle and the development processes to actually build development in regeneration into the development, into the redevelopment of Ukraine. And I think this is why you go, okay, what countries are actually regenerative? And I think we start by saying, and this is certainly the case for Palermo, where the mayor of Palermo is the guy who brought us here to look at the ground. He's been fighting the mafia for the 30 years, and the point being that you cannot have a regenerative economy if you have corruption. So the most or the least corrupt countries are the ones that are the most regenerative. Why? Because they care most about the common good, the public good.
We have a question more practical. What steps can a small or to medium-sized businesses take to start incorporating regenerative practices into its operation, but without incurring excessive costs?
Sure. One of the problems that people think is that sustainability and costs are sort of, you have to cut costs and you can't do sustainability because sustainability is an added cost. Andrew Winston just wrote an article very recently in the MIT SMR that says that actually that's wrong. The companies that are sustainable find that they're actually able to lower their costs and be more competitive because they're sustainable. And so I would argue that regeneration goes even further beyond it. And, at the Regenerative Marketing Institute, we have some pieces, and we also have a regeneration journal for startups. First of all, a regenerative startup is not driven by the traditional, hey, I got to grow really fast and I got to, maximize my, customer adoption and do the traditional Silicon Valley-based startup model. Instead, you have a much more regenerative model that says, I'm going to win over the neighborhood and build an ecosystem that keeps me strong. And the first question really is, do I even build these products? The products that I have, let's say, are they regenerative? Are they products that deserve to exist? Most companies don't even go there, right? They're just doing stuff because it's creating revenue. But what we're going to see very shortly, and it's already started, the questioning of whether a product should be put out of business. And in fact, Phil Kotler wrote an article on demarketing. How do you reduce demand for products that aren't regenerative?
Thank you, John. What do you think about regenerative economy?
I like it. Of course, I agree. I think it's more complicated, though, because I think to make our societies regenerative, to have circular economies, we've spent 200, 300 years doing the opposite, right? So it's going to take a while. And as we saw with the COVID crisis, the ever-given blockage of the Suez Canal, and of course then the consequences of the invasion of part of your country, and then the effect that had on the energy supply chain, but also the agricultural supply chain to poor countries in Africa, for example, is how interdependent we are. So even if you're running an SME, a little coffee shop, for example, you can't grow the coffee in your environment. You're going to be importing the coffee from somewhere, from Africa or Colombia or somewhere. So there are many, many small businesses, with the exception of farmers and farmer markets, and of course the service economy can be very localized, because the healthcare and community care and support, those things can be localized very much. but many other business sectors are reliant and will be reliant, I think, for the foreseeable future on international value chains, international export and import. And I worry, because the world is beginning to decouple a little bit, if you look at the trade wars between the US and China and other things that are going on, that the requirements that I'm talking about that are coming through will create an undue burden on some of the smaller companies to access those international supply chains. And then when we have problems with those supply chains, like we've had in the three examples I've given, the small companies are less resilient. So I think Ukraine should think about the financial models that allow small and medium-sized enterprises to be more resilient. Stronger guarantees, more ready access to capital that allows to shield themselves, maybe even sharing and pooling resources around legal costs and due diligence and packaging and transport, etc. As you do see in some parts of Europe with cooperative movements that will make small companies more resilient to the shocks of international trade, because I'm afraid there will be more shocks in international trade in the next few years. And we're not yet at a point where we can shield our small companies from that. So, yeah, I hope that's very much part of the planning that's going to go on in the next few months, is how, as I say, let's make sure that small companies are not disadvantaged by all the money and accessing the money, but let's also make sure they're not disadvantaged by the shocks and ruptures in global trade that we're going to see in the months and years ahead. But in the long term, I agree with Christian. I really do. Circular economy thinking is what our children want. And we should always ask that question, are products really needed? There are so many products in the marketplace at the moment that are not really needed. They don't make us happier. They don't make our lives better. They just make some people rich, right? I do think he's right. I do think increasingly people will be asking, are these products or services that really add to the quality of life?
Thank you, John. Christian, I know a lot of your works in co-author with Philip Kotler. So the question about marketing, what role can consumers play in supporting and promoting regenerative products, and how can businesses effectively communicate to the target audience about these practices?
Sure. This is a marketing problem. We've created demand for things people don't need. This has sort of been the job of marketers for a long time, since the 50s. Really, after World War II, that was the job of marketing, was to create demand and desire for products that people probably didn't need. And it's gotten to the point where, of course, we're destroying the planet. And if you see any given day, you'll see a video of the giant sort of trash heaps of clothes that Europe exports to Africa and then piles them up in waste piles. And that's not circular, right? Only 7% of the economy in fashion is actually circular. So we've got to move faster because things are falling apart. And I think it has to do with, we really have to rethink what is a business. And this idea of cooperatives and collaboratives becomes much more important because we're no longer focused on a simple, you've got the traditional business canvas, right? I think most of your audience will be familiar with Alex Osterwalder's business canvas, where you have sort of a customer that you focus on, what's your value proposition. We created a double loop of that, where not only do you focus on your customer, but you also focus on the common good. And you have to do both simultaneously. So what this does, and that's what the book has, if you go to our Regenerative Marketing Institute, we have a lot of downloads over there and walk you through this kind of thinking, because it's not fanciful, it's actually real. What we did is we uncovered several companies, like in Palermo itself, which we didn't know about any of these companies before we got here. We uncovered like 8 or 9 of these regenerative businesses that are doing this just sort of independently, without really talking to each other, without planning, just happens to be the way it works in a place that doesn't have funds, that is stressed. And part of it is, of course, you have built all these walls because, I mean, if you think back, what is the history of Palermo? It's sort of been the crossroads of all these cultures that have come and gone through Palermo, but it was also the stronghold of the mafia, which basically split each neighborhood into little controlled tribal zones and broke the trust of the public. So to me, this is going to be the biggest challenge going forward, is how do you build this economic trust in the future of Ukraine? And that translates to sort of collaborative businesses working together to build, let's say, community platforms that are digital, that work for everybody in the community, not just for one or two companies. And so they're not privatized, but these are community digital platforms that are shared. And in our book, we call it Community as a Platform. And we're actually advising several companies on how to do this, where you actually build these digital platforms to bring value, but not at the cost that a private company would. You know, Amazon takes 30-40% of each transaction. That's ridiculous. That's feudalism, as somebody once said. You know, I'm not going to mention his name. So yeah. So we need something new, and Ukraine can do it. Yeah, go ahead.
Vladimir, can I add one other thing? I totally agree with that. But we're also entering an age of radical transparency, where regardless of whether you're a small company or a big company, you won't be able to hide. And I'll give two examples. The satellite information, which your government is using at the moment in the fight against Russia, that same technology is being used now to observe the extractive industries all over the planet. So there was an article in Nature magazine a couple of weeks ago that begins to show how detailed that data is around the pollution of rivers, the ruining of forests, and the impacts it has on local communities. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world. It doesn't matter if you're 1,000 miles away from the nearest capital or you're locked away in a repressive country. The impacts of business is going to be transparent to everybody. Another example is heat leakage from buildings. The technology around that has moved so far that soon there will be drones and satellites and other things that will be able to give detailed information on how energy efficient anybody's building is, including public buildings, private buildings. So it doesn't matter if you're reporting on that or if you're whatever your PR is or your advertising, whatever claims you're making, that data is going to be publicly available. And you are going to be held accountable against it. A third example is workers around the world. We already see this with mobile phones. Even in countries where workers aren't allowed to form trade unions, they are already taking pictures of their workplaces, the conditions under which they work and live. And there are apps that they can use to report these things anonymously. And that is already transforming the way that we can hold global supply chains accountable. So I just want to sort of reinforce that we're on the verge of this sort of era of radical transparency, and with that will come much greater accountability. And it's not just accountability from governments, it's accountability from everybody, including your customers and your investors. Yeah.
Thank you, John. So the last but not the least question, John, Christian, what could you advise to Ukrainian businesses Ukrainian entrepreneurs who continue to develop their businesses in minds of war?
Shall I go first? I mean, obviously you're fighting a war.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, yeah, let's not pretend you're not in the middle of a war. You are. But I think, as your president has said, it's important that this conversation starts now around what the post-war society will be like. And with all the disadvantages and challenges you face, you have proven to be a very resilient nation. You've obviously shown that to the world. You've shown that to investors. You've shown that to business. You will be an attractive place to do business in the future for investors. And the brand of Ukraine is strong, and therefore that is good for your exports as well. I think now is not too early to begin to think, how do you reinforce Ukraine, reinforce responsible business by at least complying with what's coming from the EU and OECD. There are a lot of people that can help you do that, but I think you can go well beyond that and find a niche in the marketplace with the Ukraine brand across a whole range of products and services. But as Christian said, choose things that are really needed, that will be needed in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and not things that will be needed in 1 or 2 years, because that's where the real opportunity lies. Look at the transitions that are happening all over the world around built environments, around housing, around energy and agriculture, even in countries not affected by war. These countries are also in transition. No country is static now. Learn from the mistakes and the opportunities that other countries are making of equal economic size to your own, and I think Ukraine will be in great place. Yeah, and you have lots of friends who are out here willing to help in whatever way we can. So thank you for today, and thank you for inviting me to speak.
Thank you, John.
I would add just one little thing. Thanks, John. It's a pleasure to meet you. I would add one thing in terms of, what needs to happen right now. Ukraine needs to do a better job of marketing its cause in the West so that there isn't sort of this backpedaling in the US, for example, with the Republicans who are beginning to hesitate and show more restraint and maybe more hesitancy for supporting the cause in the Ukraine. So to do that, you have to have stronger messaging about what this war is actually about and who and what is Putin's Russia. And so this is sort of, I'm taking a step back to say this is very critical in the next year to make sure that the publics, both in the EU and in the US, understand what is actually going on and not the garbled versions of propaganda that we get and all the social media silliness that confuses the truth with misinformation. So there has to be a better job of showing the brutality of what this war is and how it's being fought. So that people understand that we do have to support Ukraine if we want a better world. Phil Kotler's parents were born in Ukraine, so you should give him a call. And then beyond that, I think the businesses, small startups, need to collaborate more. They need to find ways to work together to solve joint problems so that each one doesn't have to do it by themselves. How to export, how to import, how to get, understand the regulations, there's got to be a platform for them that's, let's say, a Ukrainian entrepreneurship platform that isn't about just networking, but actually getting the work done. I think this would be very helpful for startups all across Ukraine and outside Ukraine. You have to tap into all the Ukrainians who are outside who want to help and keep them connected through this entrepreneurial network, perhaps, which isn't just about, let's say, making profits, but also really the purpose of helping your country and Ukraine, fight.
John, Christian, thank you very, very much for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you for ideas you shared and your inspirational advices. Ukrainian business will continue to develop. We understand that sustainability is the key to laying in the foundation of future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thanks.